Welcome to Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Michael Cox, and I am your worship associate today for our virtual service alongside our Reverend Zachary Vinson. I want to invite you all to join Dr. David Corton and Reverend Barry Andrews on Thursday, September 9th at 7 via Zoom for a follow-up discussion to their August 22nd sermon toward an ecological civilization from emergency to emergence. David and Barry will continue the discussion started during the coffee hour that day on how we might make a difference as members of Cedars focused on creating a world that works for all. For more details, check out this week's Beacon. As many of you know, Donna Kramer stepped down as board president to attend to urgent family issues. I think I speak for all of us in thanking Donna for the amazing leadership she provided to all of us, especially over the last few months. Donna, you are in our thoughts and prayers. I know some of you are asking about who will be the next board president. The board has a retreat on Sunday, September 12th to discuss a variety of issues, including filling the president's position. Stay tuned. Before we start, let's pause to acknowledge that members of our congregation occupy the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of Coast Salish tribes. The homelands of the Squamish, Duwamish, Clallam, and Chimicum. People were ceded under duress through the Point Elliott and Point No Point treaties. We are grateful guests on these lands and affirm indigenous sovereignty both past and present. This acknowledgement does not substitute for the need to build authentic relationships with modern-day members of these tribes and to learn about their living culture and history. Our faith community is sustained by the generosity of our members. Your contribution will nourish the spiritual growth of our community through weekly worship and ongoing programs that cultivate connection, belonging, sharing, and caring. Included in the video description and displayed on the screen is information to make a contribution to Cedars through our PayPal account. Please take time now or later in the service to make a contribution to help sustain Cedars. Your gifts are greatly appreciated. Cedars is committed to being a welcoming and inclusive community. In all the beauty of languages, culture, and skin tones that come together in your uniqueness, we welcome you. In all the ways you experience and express gender, in the beauty of who and how you love, we welcome you. With all the religious and ethical traditions that inform your spiritual life, we welcome you. You're invited to join us today and always with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. I want to warn people that nothing is wrong with your screens or sound, but you may hear some funny noises coming from me as I try to sing during this reflection. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Despite my lack of singing abilities, I would imagine the majority of you can identify that song by John Lennon with inspiration from Yoko Ono. When I heard the theme for today was spiritual imagination, the first image that came to my mind was that song by John. My heart wants to believe what the song says. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Yoo-hoo! How was that? I would say John was a dreamer, which we need. I also find interesting the intersection of the ideas in his song and the overlap with several of the UU7 principles. For example, Principle 6 says, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Or principle number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. But over the years, while many people continue to use the song for inspiration, there are some people who believe the world envisioned by John is a fantasy, not based on the real world, provides no solutions, and is actually dangerous. And while my heart knows we need those dreamers to help us imagine and create a vision that we can all rally around to make this a better, more just world for all, I can also understand the criticism leveled against the song. Where I ended up was, not surprisingly, that we need to start from the heart and listen to the dreamers. But we then do need to find those doers who will use their heads to try and figure out the specific actions needed to make that vision real. So we need the dreamers and the doers. I am much more of a doer, but admire and draw inspiration from the dreamers. We need the dreamers to provide the vision that may seem unattainable or beyond our reach. But that vision needs more than just words. It needs structure. It needs action tied to that vision. This is one reason why I am drawn towards Unitarian Universalism. My experience with folks here in Cedars and UUs in general contain both dreamers and doers. The dreamers use their imagination to envision the better world, and the doers take that vision and put it in place. And really, what is so bad with being a dreamer? As John says, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. So I dedicate the lighting of our chalice to those dreamers who help us all imagine a better world, and to the doers who help us put into action those dreams.
As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat each other kindly as we are all one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we can all become the best that we can be.
Hello everyone. Before we share our call to worship for this service, I want to share a few quick announcements with all of you. The first is that if you happen to be someone who would like to be part of the worship team, we're hoping to find some new worship associates right now. We've had a few people with the change of the program year who have stepped down from the worship associates and are looking to add a few more people back onto the team. Also, as we continue with our services in this virtual format, we're hoping to get some people who might be interested in telling stories as part of the services. Since Catherine's departure, we've been able to make use of stories that either have been told by other ministers because of the services content we received, or we've managed to pool some stories together between the worship associates or myself. But we could really use another few people, and you don't need to worry if you don't consider yourself a storyteller. This is a great place to practice, to experiment, to learn, to have a little bit of fun and try something new. And if you do consider yourself a storyteller, this is a great way to bring your gifts into service here at Cedars. Also, I wanted to remind people that if you've seen the Beacon recently, there is an educational opportunity that is going to be happening throughout the next few months. And that is a group that is going to be examining spiritual practices from a Unitarian Universalist perspective while reading together the book Faithful Practices. This is just a chance for us to, one, learn about spiritual practices in a Unitarian Universalist context, to come together and reflect on what those practices are like for us and how we can learn from each other as we share what we're experiencing, as well as to hopefully do a little bit of our own development of spiritual practices, finding ways that we can take these sort of amorphous practices and bring them into our lives, so that way we can continue to make meaning as people of faith throughout the week and not just on Sunday mornings. I also have one other thing to share with everyone, and it is a gratitude and a wishing of safe passage. Max McRae, who has been helping with our tech team over the last almost year now, I guess, is going to be heading off to college. And so he'll no longer be helping with the tech team. And so I want to let you all know that Max is on his way to his next chapter, and to wish him well in this journey, and also to remind him, Max, if you're seeing this, that we're still here for you. And if you need anything while you're away, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to connect by phone or by email. And we thank you for everything that you've done here in your time at Cedars. And so, today we're talking about imagination. Imagination, that's how I like to say it, I guess. And imagination, I think, is something that we oftentimes overlook as a skill or an ability worth cultivating. But it's an important one. And it's so important that many people have credited imagination and the insight that comes through imagination with many great discoveries. People who talk about dreaming of things and the way that problems are solved in their dreams. Or people like Albert Einstein, who reminds us that logic, while good for getting us from point A to point B, sometimes falls short. That logic can get us from A to B, but that it's imagination that will get us everywhere. And while I don't think that logic is something we should set aside entirely, I do appreciate the esteem with which this quote about imagination lifts up the role that imagination can play in solving problems we're facing, in coming up with new solutions to situations in our lives. And if we think about it, really, at some point, anything that we encounter, any house we've walked into, any book we've read, any work of art or music that we've enjoyed, all of those things at some point started in someone's imagination. Imagination is powerful. And so with that, I want us to take a deep breath in together and let it out. And in this time, set aside all of those things that keep us from being present. Set aside all of the worries. Set aside all of those stressors that you brought with you into this space. Put them down and open yourself. Open yourself to the possibility that imagination has to offer us as we come together to worship this day. Come, let us worship together. So when I was in probably about 5th grade, my family bought a new dining room set, table and chairs. Now, this might not seem like a big deal for a lot of people, but for us it was. This was the first new piece of furniture I can remember actually my family ever buying. And we went to the store with my mom, picked out the table. It was nothing too fancy, but it was solid, it was sturdy, and it was large. Large enough to fit all 5 of us kids around the table with our friends as we gathered for meals. So, about a week, maybe 2 weeks after we went to the store and picked out this new dining room set, a truck one day pulls up in front of our house and parks. 2 men get out and they begin unloading these boxes. And it was the boxes that the chairs and the table came in, and they brought them all inside and started unpackaging them. And of course, this was quite a commotion. These were big boxes and there was wrapping everywhere and cardboard, and we were all very excited. And eventually the table and chairs were in place, and the furniture moving guys left in the truck, and we were left there with our new dining room set. Well, it didn't take long actually for us to lose interest in the table and chairs, and instead, for my sisters and I, to turn our attention to those boxes that the table and chairs had come in. Each chair had come in its own cardboard box, and it was fairly large. I mean, not quite a refrigerator box, but big enough to hold a whole chair. And they were hard, heavy-duty cardboard, the type that you could build a fort out of. And that's exactly what we started to do. We took these boxes upstairs we had a second living room, and moved all of the furniture aside and started turning them into forts. We took scissors and cut doorways and markers and drew all sorts of buttons and light switches. We cut out windows. One of the boxes became a rocket ship, and that's where we would go when we were pretending that we were going to outer space. Another was a house where we would play house together. And in the end, these boxes ended up being the thing that we were really the most excited about. We soon forgot that there was a new table. And even to this day, I only remember this scene about the table being delivered because of those boxes. And the way that those boxes, with a little bit of imagination, became something else entirely. They were no longer cardboard. It was no longer just markers on some cardboard or paper. They were houses and rocket ships, and then we were the characters who belonged in those spaces. That's taught me a lot about the power of imagination, the way that imagination can shape our reality, how how we can take these boxes and create an entirely new world. And since it's been a little while since I've got to use that sort of imagination, and I imagine for many of you it's probably been a little bit of time since you have as well, I want to invite us to get a little bit goofy together. Good thing for all of you is that you're at home or wherever you are viewing this and not on camera, so we won't get to see all of you. The bad news for me is that I get to be goofy for all of you, and it's out there forever. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a moment. Let's take another breath. Just let yourself be here. Just think about having fun. Imagine yourself having fun. Get yourself in that mindset. And what I'm going to do is in a moment, I'm going to name some things, some animals, some objects, some professions. And wherever you're at, I want you to just join me in using our imagination to pretend that we are those things. So for instance, let's say, pretend that you're a giraffe. And you stretch out your long giraffe neck. And you get your long giraffe neck and your long giraffe tongue, and you're eating leaves. So like that. As I said, you're at home, so feel free to get a little goofy. Use your imagination. Think about what it would be like to be a giraffe. Or maybe a tree. What is it like to be a tree blowing in the wind with your leaves? How about the water as it flows or maybe falls down a waterfall? What does that look like to you? Picture it and move with it, like the ocean. Using our imagination to imagine being a wave. How does it feel? What about if we imagined that we were a bird and we're flying up high in the sky over those trees that we were over the water? And we look down as a bird flying so high and we see a worm just wiggling on the ground, just a little wiggling worm, just squiggling, trying to hide from the bird, and the bird up above is flying, and it sees the worm and starts to dive, and the worm wiggling worm, and it goes underground. What if we pretended that we were a race car driver? And we're driving our race car and we're, another left turn. That's what race car drivers do, right? Oh, we're driving, I don't drive race cars. But I could be an astronaut in that rocket I talked out, blasting into space. All of these things, we can pretend and use our imagination and have a little bit of fun. And so, that's what I hope that this service inspires in all of us. A chance to be goofy, a chance to have some fun, a chance to think about what it's like to imagine things, to let our reality shift through following our imagination. And maybe, actually, through imagining, help move us in the direction we really want to go. So, how about it, folks? Let's try one more thing. This time, I want you to pick whatever animal it is at home that you can think of. It might be a kangaroo, you might be a lion, or a bear, whatever it is. But let's just take a moment and one time let yourself get a little bit goofy. And I am going to be a crocodile. And use our imagination together. Well, I hope you had fun. I hope I didn't embarrass myself too bad. And I look forward to hearing what all you imagined together. So one of the things you're probably used to from me is for me asking all of you to join me in taking a breath. But since we're talking about spiritual imagination today, I wanted to let you all know a little bit of the imaginative practice that I engage in when I'm taking a breath, when I ask you to join me in taking a breath. And for me, what that's like is I imagine in my eyes, oftentimes with my eyes closed, that as I'm breathing in, there's a light coming up, filling my head and moving back down my body. So you engaging that imagination, visualizing this air, this light, this oxygen filling my being as I breathe in deeply through my nose, just like that, just filling me to use my imagination. And similarly, as I breathe out, whether I'm breathing out through my nose or through my mouth, to imagine that same light that I brought in, now it's filled my whole body and it comes back out. To breathe in light, to breathe out light. To use our imagination to engage with this spiritual act of breathing. The first act that any of us today, when we came into this world, did, to take a breath. Everything starts with a breath. And so I invite you now to use your imagination with me, to take that deep breath in and out, and keep breathing, imagining that light coming in and out, as I offer these words by Reverend Gary Kowalski. Our time is short here on earth. Around us swirls immensities of time and space, a universe infinite in all directions. How small our hopes and cares seem amid the panorama of creation. Yet, we are not separate from the cosmos, but have evolved and grown out of it, like the leaves of a tree or the waves upon the sea. And our thoughts are its thoughts. Our lives a manifestation of never-ending vitality. Our spirits a microcosm of the beauty and creativity of the whole. Fill us then with reverence and compassion for all who are our kin. Cloud and sun, sibling and cousin, the multitude of beings who share the improbable and never to be repeated moment. All expressions, like ourselves, of the mind at large, the spirit at play, the dynamism at work, in whom we live and move, and whom we will never know. May this be our prayer both this day and in the days ahead. May it be so.
Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union, what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none. Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union, what we still. Drops of water turn a mill. Singly none, singly none.
Let's practice that spiritual imagination again by taking another breath. Just visualizing that air and light moving through us and back out. And since we're talking about imagination, for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, I want you to just all pretend that I said something inspiring about spiritual imagination. Was it good? Just kidding. So it really does amaze me in life how many adventures can start with the phrase, pretend that. Pretend that I said something inspiring about spiritual imagination. That could be an adventure. Or what about when my sisters and I as kids would jump from the couch to the coffee table to the chair to the bookshelf because someone yelled, "Pretend the floor is lava." That was a fun game as a kid. Or how I remember we used to yell, "Pretend that I could fly," as one of me or my siblings would grab the rope swing and go jumping out of the treehouse in our backyard to swing down before swooping back up and setting down inside the treehouse. Pretend that I could fly. As a child, imagination had a lot of power and sway in my life. It was a force that could transform me. It could transform my sisters. It could transform the environment we were in, the world. It could transform a cardboard box into a castle or a rocket ship. Imagination could make the impossible, something like the floor being lava or a young child flying. Imagination could make the impossible somehow seem possible. And as I grew older, I'm sure as many of you experienced, this sense of wonder, this sense of imagination being ever present in our lives began to fade. And as I look around in a lot of my adult life, I find that my application of imagination is much more limited. Those impossible things that once happened in my living room as a kid don't seem as possible to my adult imagination. And then realizing this, I began spending some time recently thinking about where are those places in my life where imagination is still actively present. Where are those places where that sense of possibility is cultivated still? And in reflecting on this, asking this question of myself, the thing that came to mind that, for me at least, the place where I see imagination the most present in my life is in my spiritual life. It's in the spiritual practices that I engage in and the meaning I put behind certain things I do, certain words I share, lighting a candle. Those ways of engaging my imagination are where I feel that creative force is present in my adult life. So one of the first spiritual practices that I started to engage with was one that was very much rooted in using your imagination. In fact, it was a practice that was aimed at helping you develop a better ability to visualize and to use your imagination as a spiritual tool. It was a simple practice, and it's something that all of you could try at home. It involved taking a candle. Didn't matter what type of candle. It could even be a little electric tea light like we often give to the kids here. But you take a candle and you set the candle in front of you on a table. And you take some time just observing, seeing how the flame dances and flickers, maybe how it reacts to the air in the room as things move and a breeze brushes across the wick. You notice the color and observe the other details about the candle until you can just notice every detail about this candle. And then, taking a breath, simply close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, try to hold that image of the candle in your mind. To see the flame as you saw it with your eyes open, the way it flickers, the color. To just hold it there. And any time that image fades or you get distracted, just open your eyes and refocus and try again. And to do that until you can get to the point where you can hold that image of a flame in your mind's eye, no matter what else is happening. And this is something I tried it for weeks at a time, trying to keep my mind focused. And at times it felt futile. At times it was hard. At times I could keep the flame focused, but everything around the flame was changing. But in my imagination, I could still hold it. And I practiced this and practiced adding details to what I was able to hold in my mind, to envision. And I found that with time, as with most things, like a physical exercise, that the imaginative muscles that I was using strengthened. I soon was able to hold that image of the candle, to visualize other things in the room, to focus on the details and to hold them in my attention in my mind's eye. And the thing is, like, to this day, that's still something, when I close my eyes, I can still see a flame. I tended to use a tapered candle. So when I close my eyes, I still see a tapered candle sitting in a brass candle holder with the flame flickering. And it sounds simple, but this sort of imagination, this sort of visualization is a primary tool in many spiritual practices. Another place where this spiritual type of imagination came into my life was actually 3 specific classes I took in seminary. The first was a class titled Preaching as Theater. And it was a class that got us to start looking at what worship was, what a sermon was, and to start bringing in some of the theatric elements of worship. Not in the way that what we were doing was necessarily a play, but to think about the texts and the stories that we were sharing. To think about the characters in them, to imagine in our mind and put ourselves in the place of the characters. I think of, in this class, there was one assignment where we had to choose a figure from mythology. And we had to imagine the story that they had in mythology and try to personify it, to try to make it real, to imagine ourselves in the role of that character or in the role of another character in the story. And to put our mind in that place and then to try to write a sermon from that perspective. There were some interesting sermons that came out of this. Mine specifically, I chose the myth of Prometheus from Greek mythology, the story where Prometheus steals the fire from the temples on Olympus and brings it to humans to save them from destruction, an act he was eventually punished for by Zeus. But what I found interesting was this is a story I'd always loved. And I had always loved how in the story of Prometheus, he sets out to save people. And I think that's the part that I loved of this story, was that he did something that saved us. And I never really thought about what it was like for Prometheus. Why would someone do this? Why would he put himself at risk to save us, to save people from destruction? And using this sort of imagination to place yourself in this role, I found that the story took on a completely different meaning. I developed empathy for the figure of Prometheus. He wasn't just a hero. He was someone who sacrificed. He was someone who loved people, who didn't want to see them destroyed. And I never imagined that being his role before. I was always focused on the fact that people got saved. And through imagination, I was able to empathize with the figure of Prometheus. Still can't empathize with Zeus, but that's another story. In another class taught by a Jesuit brother titled Experiments in Prayer and Meditation, we were given passages of the Christian scriptures, stories that many people who have gone to Sunday school will have encountered at some point in their lives. Stories about Jesus dividing the loaves and fishes, or about the Pharisees questioning him in front of the temple. And as we read these scriptural stories as a meditation practice, we were invited to imagine ourselves as one of the various characters in the story. To actually go in our mind's eye and to think about, what would it have looked like to be there? What would you have been wearing? What were the smells? Could you hear things beyond the people talking? To set the scene in your mind. And the thing about this was not that necessarily I think we recreated the perfect scene of what would have been happening historically in our imaginations, but that there was a deepening, that you start to see these characters in these stories as actual beings, as people that you can relate to, as people that had feelings that could touch and move through the world like us. Even fictional characters can start to take on these qualities when we let our imagination delve into these stories to explore them. Another class that encouraged this use of imagination was a class I took my final semester of seminary. And I took it because the joke at Star King School for the Ministry where I went was how instead of final papers, everyone just could do an interpretive dance at the end of the term. And so I figured that I couldn't end my grad school career without having a class that it required me to actually do an interpretive dance for my grade. And the class was titled Encountering the Sacred Dimensions of Dance. If you know me at all, or saw me moving as the various animals earlier, you might note that I'm not always the most coordinated person. You throw rhythm in there and I honestly, it's a scene. I'm sure you'll see it someday. I'm not a dancer. This class made me uncomfortable, and that's partly why I took it. But one of the things I found that was really meaningful in this class was the way that we began every session. We would start in the dance hall where we met. There was about 15 students in this class. And our professor, Carla De Sola, would put on music. It's a variety of music. Sometimes it was drums or classical music or flutes or ambient noise. And for the first 20 minutes of every class, we would do what Carla called exploring God's space, which was really just us free form, exploring, moving around the space, trying to listen to the music, to embody the music, and to let our imaginations dictate our movements as we were hearing it. And what I found was that this sort of playful dancing, this interpretive dancing, while goofy and at times uncomfortable for me, brought me in touch with emotions in my body in a way that just using words wouldn't have. It brought me in touch with the way a certain song might make me feel sad or sometimes joyful. And what does that sadness or joy look like when I express it with my body, not my words? What is it like to move in a sad way? It's sad. As I said, I'm not very good at this moving. But you get the idea. To engage with our bodies and the environment and our imagination in a way that helps us come to a new understanding of some of these emotional truths in our lives. So those are some experiences in which spiritual imagination has come up in my past, and is something still I'm trying to explore more, to bring more into spaces like this, in our virtual services, into my daily life. And the reason why I think that this is important is because if we turn back to this quote that I shared at the beginning from Albert Einstein, this idea that logic will get you from A to B, but that imagination will get you everywhere. I think oftentimes when we lose sight of our imaginative tendencies, when we don't exercise that part of our being, our imagination, we end up falling into patterns of behavior that, even when they're not helpful, repeat themselves. We end up falling into this way of thinking that we're doing this because that's how it's always been. We lose sight of the fact that somewhere along the way, someone once had an idea in their head, they imagined something, they dreamed of something, and made it happen. And that everything that we experience in the world, everything that we encounter, that we love, the arts, are the result of people who have exercised their imagination and used that imaginative impulse and brought it into the world. And as I said, as adults, there's not always a ton of chances, opportunities to do this, to be goofy, to play, to create something new. But I believe that spiritual practices are one of the avenues that we get to use to cultivate that sense of imagination. And hopefully, not just imagination, but fun, play, new possibilities. It's about getting beyond just we need to get from here to here, but asking the question, where do we really want to go? Do we want to build a rocket ship and go to space? A castle? What is it that we want? And can we trust our imaginations and each other to get there together? It's worth a try. I hope that each of you, in small ways, but in the week ahead, will take a chance. Use your imagination. Take a breath. Just that small breath to start exercising that muscle. We say it all the time, there's lots of challenges that we are facing in the world. We hear again and again, I just today talking about the recent laws that went into effect in Texas, the continued presence of COVID, the environmental crisis that we're facing. All of these challenges that are going to need new and innovative solutions. And unless we're willing to engage our imaginations and try to come up with new ways of approaching these things, I don't know that we're going to be able to overcome them with the same ways of thinking and the same patterns as we're used to. We need something new. So let's imagine it together to the glory of life.
My roots go down, down to the earth. My roots go down, down to the earth. My roots go down, down to the earth. My roots go down. My roots go down, down to the earth. My roots go down, down to the earth. My roots go down, down to the earth. My roots go down. I am a wildflower pushing through the stones. I am a wildflower even through the storm, my roots go down. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down. I am a mountain reaching for the sun. I am a mountain reaching for the sun. I am a mountain reaching for the sun. My roots go down. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down, down into the earth. My roots go down.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Our service this day has ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. May we go forth and exercise our imaginations. Be bold and creative. Use logic, but also dream. Try new things. Stretch ourselves. That is the path to our salvation, to the glory of life.